and Defense Committee. Avi, welcome to the Hagee Hotline. How are you today?
Pleasure being here to you.
You know, you come at a very opportune time because in many ways it's a new United States. It's a different America than the one that you've had the opportunity to see working in the last 8 years. What's the attitude of Israel towards a United States with Trump in the Oval Office?
Well, no doubt that we have a lot of expectations, and when we heard before the elections that he intends to move the embassy to Jerusalem, I think that we are in Israel, many Israelis, maybe many other people, Jewish people worldwide, are waiting to see it happen. Now, I know that people are trying and leaders are trying to connect between what's going on in the Middle East and what's going on in Israel when we speak about moving the embassy to Jerusalem. I think that over the last 6 years, we've understood that what happens in the Middle East has nothing to do with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. People thought that what happened in Egypt has to do something with Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It has nothing. Neither the revolution, when Hosni Mubarak was toppled, let alone when the Muslim Brotherhood were toppled. It has nothing to do with Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Libya, Muammar Gaddafi that was toppled has nothing to do with Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Syria, the bloodshed that goes in Syria, 600,000 Syrians got killed, 2.5 million injured, 12 million refugees. It has nothing to do with Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Yemen, that was conquered by the Houthis, another proxy of the Iranian regime, has nothing to do with Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Iraq, nothing to do with Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Sudan, nothing to do with Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So it's about time to try to focus on what really had to be done in order to accept and to recognize the state of Israel as it is. You know, Jerusalem is the capital for Israel. There's no one country, including the U.S., that says it's not. But nevertheless, we don't have even one embassy in Jerusalem. And it's about time. If I would have been asked by President Trump, what's the most important and first step to be done, I would tell him, move the embassy to Jerusalem now. That's the way how leaders behave. That's the way how leaders are leading. You know, in our terminology in Israel, we say a leader is saying, go forward. A good leader says, follow me.
Without question. And you know, as you mentioned, the move of the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, many people would say, well, what's the big deal? And other people would say, well, why would you create such a crisis? And I think it's important for them to understand the history of the matter. One, Jerusalem has been the capital of Israel since the days of King David. And so there are thousands of years of history, including recent history in the modern times when Arab leaders wrote in their own writings that they recognized that Jerusalem was indeed the capital of Israel. And as you mentioned so clearly, the conflicts that are happening around the world that might get blamed on the Middle East or get blamed on Israel actually have nothing to do with Israeli policy or the Israelis' desire to live in their own nation and to live a free and peaceable life. And so there's a lot of confusion that takes place. Some of the confusion was created by the United States. Obama, by not voting at the UN when UNESCO came out with its most recent hypocrisy, created what I would consider a mountain. But moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem moves that mountain and reestablishes clearly for the world that the United States is an ally of Israel and Israel is a democracy in the Middle East that we recognize. Is that correct?
It's more than that. You know, when you take the 67 line, people are talking about the 67 line as if the modern history of the State of Israel started in 1967. And the United Nations Security Council resolution recently brought speaks about 67 line as if there's strictly forbidden to do anything beyond the 67 line. But history didn't start in 1967. It started 100 years ago when the Foreign Minister of England Balfour stated that it is a Jewish state for the Jewish people to be calm over the years. That was the basic line for the British mandate given in 2020. Then the second step is 29th of November 1947, when at the United Nations, the whole country, including the United States, confirmed the partition plan. Now, can you imagine that the Israeli leadership at that time, before establishing the country, accepted the partition plan? The partition plan speaks about 55% of the state of Israel to the Jews and 45% to the Arabs. At that time, Palestinian was not mentioned at all. And Jerusalem was not under Israeli sovereignty, but under international supervision. And nevertheless, 3 years after the Holocaust was ended, we accepted it. Thank God the Arabs rejected it. They invaded Israel with 7 armies, and we had the independence war, where we lost 1% of our population at that time in Israel. And the war ended with 78% for the state of Israel, including small part of Jerusalem. That's the second phase. The third phase is 1967. So those who speak about the 1967 as a beginning, no, it's not a beginning.
Correct, it's just the culmination.
Absolutely. I don't know if you're aware, or people are aware all over the world, that in Jerusalem today, while we are speaking here, we have 260,000 Jews living beyond the 67 line in Jerusalem, and only 240,000 Jews living inside the 67 line in Jerusalem. So those who predict or forecast or dream that Jerusalem is going to be back to the line of 1967, whether it's the United Nations resolutions or any other resolution, it's a dream. It cannot be fulfilled.
Well, and the way that I put that in a context for American audiences to understand, because America and the West, they have the privilege of vast amounts of land and a lot of space. And Israel, this is not a luxury. Israel is a very compact nation. Israel is a nation where its worst enemies are just a few miles away. And so whenever they hear West Bank, East Bank, and these details, I asked them this question. I said, what is the East Bank of the Mississippi? And they'll say, well, it's the state of Mississippi. I said, what's the West Bank of the Mississippi? And they say it's Louisiana. I said, what if the United Nations told you that the West Bank of the Mississippi ended in California? Yeah, and now they say, well, that's ridiculous. And the reality of it is utilizing the 67 line is a ridiculous notion. The same way that calling Tel Aviv the capital of Israel is a ridiculous notion. What happens in Israel when the United States moves the embassy to Jerusalem?
Once it happens, and I hope it will happen this year, it's going to give the Israelis feeling that finally Jerusalem, as the holy city of Jerusalem, is getting its international recognition, its international dignity. It is something that has to be done, and I don't see any other leader in the whole world except the United States, and mainly under Trump, to be the first leader, the first president in the US and the first leader worldwide to take the embassy and to move it to Jerusalem. It can be done in one day. There is a consulate, American consulate in Jerusalem. You just have to change the plates from consulate to embassy, and it's done. Those who are threatening us that, it's going to be an earthquake in the whole region, we are in an earthquake. I'm telling you, we are in an earthquake for the last 6 years. It doesn't need to move any embassy to Jerusalem or elsewhere.
Yeah, the conflict that exists is going to exist regardless of where the mail for the United States Embassy is sent. With the United States making this declaration, it sends a very clear message to the world that Israel and the United States are indeed allies, and that relationship is strong and thriving. May that continue to be the case. And Mr. Dichter, thank you for coming.
I think if I may add, I would tell it's a main issue for the United States as the main superpower in the world. To make such a decision means that the United States has its own policy, understands the importance of moving an embassy to the capital. Show me one country in the world that your embassy is not positioned in the capital. So it's about time to locate it in the capital, Jerusalem. That's the capital of Israel.
For our own independence and our willingness to demonstrate strength, I agree with you very much.